I'm sure that the audience has very interesting questions. That's why I will sit beside the speakers and I will not dominate with my questions, but let us begin with your questions. Maybe you have a question already. If there are no questions from the audience, I would like to begin myself. It was very interesting for me to see this link between the first and the last, and actually all three presentations. As we speak in essence about things that were intended different at the beginning, maybe not everything was thought over, and now we see these specific results, specific shapes, forms that we believe are positive and some are also negative. What is your opinion, all three of you? So what do you think? Is there a way how we could find out at the very beginning what is the positive and what we should keep and what we should not? And on the other hand, what we, at this moment, we know that the cats are there. Do we have to get rid of them or not? Because maybe it will mutate in something very beautiful in 50 years. I believe that there are positive and negative things, and if we think in these categories, that would be a mistake. Because the cats that I told you about, this was not a cat story, it was a people story. That showed that something that bothers some actually helps others. So I do not believe that we should look for examples that we should keep. I suggest that we should look at the actual person in his or her real life, and that life will show what is viable and what is not, and what they need and what they do not. Thus, I would avoid looking for the positive examples and implementing them, because the times change, and the last speaker actually demonstrated how radically the values and approaches have changed. I think we can split this question into two parts. First, namely what to do or what not to do with what has already happened, and how not to make mistakes in the future. In the first case, I agree with the assumption that the reply is already in the question, namely the word to do. We just have to let the system to continue to exist and not hinder or in any way restrict it. We as architects, I don't think that we should see all the solutions. We should find all the solutions with regards to the beautification of the space of the area. But I believe that only in the last 2 decades we can speak about futurism or utopia as a science that tries to predict what will happen in the world, what processes will dominate, and it's very difficult. Our evolution has proved that. For example, in the case of genetic engineering, I do not believe that we'll ever be able to foresee the result 100%, otherwise we would be a community of gods. Of course, we can always try that. But as I said, our modern science, through these futuristic and utopian approaches, is quite successful in this way. If there are no other questions, there is a question.
Kristīna Aboliņa.
Kristīna Aboliņa from the University of Latvia. I just arrived from Poland, where an architect delivered a presentation about a wonderful approach where they draw new cities for the growth, for development. And when this question was asked of what to do, I wanted to, and he was asked whether do you in your training ever cover the aspect of cities that become smaller? And he just turned around and said, you know, there will always be winners and losers, and you in the Baltic states, you are losers. You shouldn't be worried. We will build new cities here. Because his presentation was based on the fact that there are so many people moving into cities every year. So, and I have a question to you as speakers with regards to the compilation of data. Mr. Sama showed as that the demand for new housing decreases. And here I want to ask, how long will we have this line that grows if we have this population fall? And in the case of Purciems, what do you think, what is your opinion about the intermediaries that is involved in specific cases and specific projects? Because these people are only interested in making money. The banks are not interested in having empty houses, into having empty buildings, what we can see now in the center. Because in the vicinity we have 4 concrete slabs being built. I do not really believe that people who have this hikikomori lifestyle, if that was their free choice, if they were offered humane conditions, I think they would choose that. I suppose I have to answer. Some clarification with regards to the line. This line did not reflect the situation with regards to new buildings. This was the financial demand. Here we are not speaking about the construction of new buildings, but of the demand for financial resources, and that covers both types of markets, of secondary market and the new buildings market. I was speaking about the American market because it's a very good indicator, as it developed in very isolated conditions and there is very little influence from external factors. And the American demographic situation reflects very clearly how the population grows or not. And I do not believe that they have had any problems with any demographic bits. And I think that's quite a good reflection of the tendencies there, or the trends. As to hikikomori, I think that you probably slightly misunderstood what I said. This is not what they are forced on, because they have no other choice. This is their personal, individual, considerate choice. Intermediaries that are not actually interested in the people or their lives. I do not think that I can comment a lot here. There will always be people like this. Maybe that will mutate into something beautiful in the future. Good afternoon. I am Indra. I am a landscape architect. I have a question about people. I have been wanting to ask this question since the very morning, and it's a question about dreams. What do these people dream of? Maybe you managed to find out, because there are very many memories. The houses have memories, family histories. People's lives were spent there. There have been successes. Children, elderly people, they also have dreams. And they have this drive to change something. So what do we strive for? And only then we have the offer and we choose what is available. Thank you. Well, within my research, I had a few interviews, and these interviews showed that people who live there, you indicated that the old houses become empty. That's not true. People live in both types. I believe the Primavera project was not was quite empty because of the prices. But if we speak about the people who live in the older buildings, and when we met them, they said yes, they would be happy if they could live in the new buildings, and then they compared the reasons why they live where they live and why they do not live where they could live. And if they have to invest quite a lot of money into new buildings, in new apartments, they have the same reasons for living there as the inhabitants of the older buildings have, like location, greenery, and so on. Those inhabitants of the older buildings would like to live in the new buildings.
Varu uzdot jautājumu? Es gribu uzdot jautājumu Sarmas.
I would like to ask a question to Mr. Sarma because he showed a wonderful graph about the development of the American housing market since the 30s of the previous century until 2008. Maybe he could tell what happened at the end of 2008. Maybe US faces the same situation as in the 30s. That would be interesting for me if you could provide more detail. Yes, I can. I think what we have to avoid is try not to analyze something that happened recently. The crisis struck in 2008. There were huge drops in all categories, in all cases. So what the statisticians do now is arithmetics of small numbers. Our economy, for example, shrank for so many numbers, and now we have the highest growth rates in Europe. So this is arithmetics of small numbers. And I do not believe that we can actually tell what is going on in the world and in the US after 2008 because we don't have an objective point of reference. We cannot say that people want to buy more or that their economic circumstances have improved or that the growth is attributable to certain conditions and facts. So I do not believe that we have adequate tools, adequate reference material to be able to assess. So many statisticians, when they consider financial, social problems, they stop at 2008. If you look back in the history slightly more, you could conclude that many compilations of statistical data actually stopped in 1913. And the statistical data for the period of time from 1913 to the 50s was not really serious. So shortly, I can say that I cannot tell what happened after 2008. Good afternoon. I have a question to Mr. Visvaldes. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I think it was very powerful. The theory is very interesting and the selection of facts were chosen confirming this theory. There were no contradictory facts, and I believe that this theory is very powerful. But I have a question. You showed a graph where the number of houses bought decreased and the area of rented space increased. So I do not know if we can speak about people wanting to move into smaller living spaces, but maybe the housing management type has changed. Maybe you have done a research into that. Are you sure that the area of the living space has decreased? And the second question, you mentioned that you looked only at the American market, but hikikomori phenomenon actually comes from the East, from Asia, as far as I know. For example, from the fans of manga. So what is the proportion of people who are actually the result of this undesirable mutation? How many of these people actually live in the US? As to hikikomori, that's easy to reply. According to the statistical data, it's 1 in 100 Americans, so 1%. These are Americans in the age group from 14 to 16. So in one way or the other, 1% of all Americans suffer from this syndrome. Speaking about the demand for rentals, I have to say that theory is only a theory, and there could be contradictory theories. But what cannot be challenged is that when a demand rapidly increases in one area or the other, the supply cannot manage to follow. And as a result of this phenomenon, the rental prices increase drastically. And what they can obtain for the same amount of money is less and less. So, objectively, the demand is for a smaller rental space. So there is no specific other correlation. It is clear. But of course, when we see that the small apartments are built in great numbers, for example, in the next 8 years, then it is possible that this will, in a way, increase the average size of apartments eventually. But if we look at the Bloomberg, for example, then in 2028 or so, these construction conditions will be amended, and the minimum space will be increased maybe to 420 square feet. Of course, the facts are manipulated to support certain theories, and that always happens. Thank you. Thank you for your comments about 2008, because that's closely related to the case of America. I have to say that the example of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and if we look at the economic situation, these creditors invested a lot or contributed a lot to the immovable property crisis as they offered secondary mortgaging or remortgaging, offering very good conditions. So as a result of this, the mortgaging requirements and the housing policy changed a lot, changed quite drastically. And currently, the U.S. Situation has changed, and it's not so easy to purchase a house or housing. But at the same time, in the U.S., the people are very mobile, and they change their homes, their house every 5 to 7 years. So there is no problem moving somewhere else if they have the financial means. And that's the actual situation. Also, the U.S. faces the problem of enormous migration. The whole of the developed world faces this problem because very many people arrive, and this process sometimes is uncontrolled. These people need housing, but they do not qualify for the requirements with regards to the local population. I would like to use the opportunity to ask a question to Zane. I like the metaphor about the new buildings depriving the center of existence, depriving the old houses of their center of existence. So the older buildings are around and the new buildings are in the center. If we speak about other housing estates of Riga, where there are Soviet buildings built around even older buildings, does that in any way change the mutual relationships between these buildings and houses? I cannot maybe comment the specific case that you mentioned, but architects maybe know even better than I do. We have to think about what is there, not only about the possibility of constructing something. Yes, in Purvciems there are open spaces that are close to the center, and it's quite desirable. But it's too late to speak about this because the houses have been built, and I do not think that we can interfere in any way, in any significant way. It is clear that no spaces where something is built are empty. Even your example, and irrespective where these places are located, in the center or somewhere else, we have to look at the relationship between the old and the new. I have another question. One of the things that started the session was about the finding of communities, the search for communities. And this is one of the central issues that are discussed by the urban planners, by architects, by various socially active individuals, like empowerment of these communities and so on. But at the same time, we often see that it's quite hard to find these communities. But when we would like this community to come together, it doesn't. And it is possible that these people even try to escape. They do not want to come together and do something because they have something else to do. So if we, maybe by this desire to see, to find these communities everywhere, maybe we place a burden on the people. This is something invented by analysts, but in the reality, people do not actually need these communities. I believe the term community is very abstract. And people tend to fill it with their own contents. But when we have changes that would affect a larger number of people, then this term is very convenient because we need a community, but we do not go deeper. We do not look into what is the meaning of the community. Of course, it's very convenient to have public discussions about certain projects, and then there is a certain number of people that come there and express their opinions, but it's far from a community. At the same time, I do not want to say that we have to find out what each and every person thinks, but I would like to invite to avoid generalization, assuming that things tend to be similar in all places, and try to adjust these situations to some criteria, because each and every person has his or her opinion. Some people need these social activities, and some do not. There was a question about dreams. I cannot tell about all the inhabitants of this housing estate. I had this contact established with 3 women. I cannot speak of dreams here. It was more pain. They tried to fill the emptiness within themselves. They come together and they have lost something in their lives, and they were all older than 60 years of age, and this cat was a possibility to go out, to meet, and to speak. But at the same time, these women did not want to participate in a larger meeting or do something together in a larger group, because each and every person has his or her comfort area, and they do not maybe want to go as far as some other people in the social context. So we have to avoid generalization and avoid using these terms that actually do not mean anything. I have been told that we have almost run out of time. I would like to express my gratitude to all the speakers about, and not only about, this vision where structures and the lives of people coincide. And this is a very important perspective. Thank you.